सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
For an economy like India's, exports are an important pillar of economic growth. And especially now with the Modi government's push for Make in India and to make India an export hub, the export sector is very, very important as far as policy making and economic growth goes. So that's the sector that we're going to analyze today in this episode of Macrosutra. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, and we have with us, as always, Radhika Pandey, Associate Professor at NIPFP. Thanks, Radhika, for joining us. So now, Radhika, we have data for the first 5 months of the financial year, that's April to August.
Right.
How have exports done in the latest month, August, and also for the entire April to August period?
Yeah. So for the month of August, if we look first, so exports have been contracting for the last many months, but in August, our goods exports contracted by 6.9%,
Okay.
which is lower than the pace of contraction that we saw in the earlier months.
I see. So the minus sign is less.
Yes, so which is a positive sign, because in the April to June period, we saw contraction in double digits. So on average, exports were contracting by 15%, but in August, exports contracted by 6.9%.
Okay.
And if we exclude oil exports, if we just look at non-oil exports, in fact, there was a positive growth. So mainly the contraction in exports that we are seeing is due to decline in oil exports, because we saw during this period till now what we have seen, leaving aside the few days now that oil prices have risen.
Right.
But if you look at a longer horizon, oil prices have been falling, and therefore, and we process crude oil and we export oil. So if prices go down, then the value of oil exports goes down. So that is the reason of one of the most important reasons for the decline in oil in overall exports is due to the decline in oil exports. So that is the August picture.
Okay.
And if we look at the full 5 months data, so whenever we look at 5 months, we compare with the 5 months of the last year.
Absolutely.
So if we look at April to August of 2023, we compare with the April to August of 2022 and see what has happened. And in that case, what we see is that overall exports have declined by 12%. So
in this entire 5 month period.
In this so exports are down 12% as compared to April to August of last year. And we can talk about what are the components that decline. But again, one of the main reasons for the decline has been the decline in oil prices and commodity prices. So that is one reason. And the other reason is subdued global demand. So these two factors together explain a major chunk of the decline in exports that we saw this year, because 2022 was a period when commodity prices were rising. But now we saw from the second half of 2022, commodity prices went down. So that benefited imports, but it also hampered our exports.
Of course.
So particularly like engineering goods, iron and steel. So those prices which were rising at one point in time last year, now those prices are easing, and therefore in value terms, our exports have gone down. So there has been a broad-based deceleration in exports of goods in April to August.
Right. And I think we should explain for our viewers here that when we talk about oil exports, it's not as if India is exporting oil. It's the petroleum products, right?
Yeah, it's petroleum products. So we process.
Yeah.
So we import the crude oil, like we import from Russia, and then we process, and then we export petroleum products. So that is also, in terms of data, it's counted as petroleum exports or oil exports. So that was one major reason for the decline in overall goods exports. And also the other categories of exports where we are referring to commodities, there also we saw a slump because of the decline in commodity prices, particularly. So if we see, what are the broad categories? We see one is the oil exports, and then there are manufactured goods exports, which include items like chemicals, leather products, engineering goods, electronic goods, other manufactured products. So most of these categories saw a decline from 2022 to 2023, barring electronic goods. Now, electronic goods, we know, is a success story. We can give the credit to PLI, the mobile phone exports. So electronic goods have been holding up well, but leaving aside electronic goods and some part of ores and minerals, most of the categories have seen a decline. Textiles and ready-made garments exports have seen a steep decline from not only 2022, but also from 2021. So that means, last 2 years, we have seen a decline in textile products. Also, gems and jewelry, which used to be our major export category, that has also seen a decline in exports. So broadly, we have seen a decline in most of the components of exports, leaving aside the electronic goods.
Right. So now, is this decline, you mentioned that a large part of it is driven by a fall in commodity prices.
Yes.
But how much of it is also being driven by the slowdown in the advanced economies?
Yes, it is driven by a slowdown in advanced economies. It is being driven by a slowdown not only in advanced economies, but also in emerging economies, Asian markets. And then there are other sector-specific issues also that are at play. So particularly for gems and jewelry, it is driven by a slowdown. It is driven by a slowdown in US markets. It is driven by a slowdown in other advanced economies, and it's also a large part of it is also driven by a slowdown in Chinese economy, slowdown in lockdown in China, that also impacted our exports. So it is a combination of falling commodity prices, slowdown in demand, and then there are sector-specific problems that need to be addressed. We can talk about, there has been a structural shift. We are losing a considerable share in some of the Asian markets that we can talk about. Yeah, so it is multiple factors, and there are some sector-specific issues. There are some logistic issues that need to be addressed in addition to falling commodity prices, which I think will now firm up because oil prices are firming. We will see other commodity prices also will firm up. So we will see that part of exports building up. Those cyclical components will start increasing. But then there are other structural sector-specific issues that need to be addressed to ensure in order to boost our competitiveness.
Right. And now, before we get to this churn in the export destinations, there are a few questions from the audience we had that had to do with the PLI scheme. And I thought that it would be a good time to get to those. So Sankalp asks, do you see that PLI supported companies, do you see them developing long-term global competitiveness over time? Also, what policy changes are required from the government side to link India's SMEs to the global supply chain?
Yes, so PLI, as we have seen for electronic goods, it has been a success story, but not for some of the other sectors, for textiles and other sectors. So PLI should be seen as the instrument of providing incentives. It should not become a subsidy, and if it turns into a subsidy, then it will hamper competitiveness. So there are a lot of things to analyze when we are studying when we are considering PLI and its success, whether it's a success or not. A lot of factors go into it. How much incentive you need to provide, what are the kind of incentives, and what are the export increase that we want to see here. So that that is different for each sector, and that cannot continue indefinitely. It has to be reviewed periodically. So,
Of course.
for some sectors it's doing well, for some sectors it's not doing well. So, for which sector it's not doing well, so that needs to be reviewed. And as far as SMEs are concerned, we know that they have a huge export potential. MSMEs are contributing almost 40% to our export, and a host of changes are required to integrate them to the global value chain, which involve making the labor laws more flexible, which involve giving incentives to enhance scale. If we want to be part of the global value chain, we need to expand in scope and in scale. We need to increase our size, because if we are just small, and if the regulations are such that they are incentivizing us to remain small, then it's not possible to compete in the global markets in the long run.
So basically, the SMEs can't remain small anymore.
Yeah.
They have to not be SMEs anymore.
Yes, so there is a need to revisit all the regulations which incentivize them to remain small.
Absolutely.
If in the long run they have to boost their export competitiveness, because going forward one has to increase scale and size to become part of the global value chain. Logistics need to be improved, infrastructure needs to be improved, ease of doing business needs to be improved. A lot of efforts have been taken to decriminalize a lot of offenses. All those things need to be done. We have something called the Niti Aayog has developed this index on export preparedness. So those things need to be reviewed periodically, which states are doing well, which sectors are doing well. So there is a comprehensive relook required. MSMEs have potential, but they should not get inhibited just because their size is small. So that is, at some point in time, they need to grow into medium to become part of the global value chain.
Right. And now Aditya also has a question on PLIs, except what he asks is, can the services sector benefit from a PLI scheme? Because services exports are growing quite strongly on their own.
Right.
But what if they had a PLI scheme for the services sector? Would that benefit them?
So again, in services, what we generally understand is that services sector are doing well because IT is doing well,
Right.
So we need to move away from that perspective and see that there are a lot of other services also which hold export potential. So whether PLI or whether some other kind of policy support in terms of boosting our tourism, hospitality, travel, these are some of the areas where more needs to be done to harness our export potential, because those are areas where we can further boost our export potential, because we have this target of $2 trillion of exports by 2030, which includes $1 trillion for goods exports and $1 trillion for services. And a lot cannot just depend on IT. We need to diversify. And in order to diversify, whatever steps are needed, whether PLI or other steps needed to, improve attractiveness of our tourist destinations, whatever needs to be done towards improving infrastructure, green corridors, to make the non-IT services more attractive. Looking at legal services, audits, accounts, developing skills. So a lot needs to be done to diversify, not just because IT is performing on its own. IT is flourishing.
Right. It doesn't need any.
It doesn't need, and it should not get.
Yeah.
So the focus should be on the non-IT services and to diversify, so that it's the services, the resilience in services exports that we are seeing now, the cushion that services is providing to our current account deficit, that gets sustained in the long run.
I remember a few episodes ago, actually more than a few episodes ago, we talked about how other business services, the exports of that was growing.
Yes.
As you said, accountancy, lawyers, all of that.
Yes.
So maybe if we focused there and developed skills there and made that a kind of a hub that we could export these services, maybe that could help.
Yes.
So now coming to the question of our export destinations.
Yes.
From your article, I could see that there is some churn there, that where we usually what used to account for large chunks of our exports now is not accounting for as much. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so when we talk about destinations, again, there are two ways of looking at it. One is just comparing the first 5 months of this year
Right.
with the first 5 months of last year. And there we see that there is a decline of around, as I mentioned, $21 billion decline in terms of exports, out of which $12 to $13 billion is accounted for by Asia. So overall, $21 billion is the decline in the level of exports. It was $158 billion. It has now come back, reduced to some $139 billion.
And this Asia, of course, includes China.
Yes, it includes China. So this is the overall. This is overall India's exports in the first 5 months of the current financial year. They are down by almost $21 billion, and out of which one major chunk is, of course, the US, where the decline is $3 billion. But leaving aside US, if we club the other countries where we have seen a slump in exports, most of them are Asian economies.
Right. And no, why I asked the question about China is because, again, the Chinese economy is so big that it might be skewing the picture, or is this decline across all Asian countries?
It is across all. In fact, China is not skewing the picture. We don't see much change, because it may be that when we look at imports, there we will see the change. But in terms of export, there is only a marginal decline in our exports to China. But in terms of Asian economies, the major decline in our exports is to Bangladesh, to Sri Lanka. These are the Indonesia, ASEAN countries. There, our exports have slumped as compared to last year. So that is one major insight that was learning for us also, because typically what we understand whenever we talk about export slowdown, we say that it is due to advanced economies, demand slowdown, due to aggressive monetary policy tightening that is happening in the advanced economies, and that is causing them to lower their demand, and that is impacting our exports. But if you look at destination-wise exports and compare the first 5 months of last year with the first 5 months of this year, of course, US has seen a decline, but then there are other Asian economies also where we have seen this decline. And therefore, and then, as I said, the second approach is to look at the share. What has happened to the share of various regions in India's export basket.
Right.
Look at Asia, look at Europe, look at America, look at Africa. So there, if we look at a slightly longer period for 5 years, we see that the share of Asia has gone down from 47 to 38%.
Oops, over 5 years.
Over 5 years. And this decline is in fact over 4 years, from COVID time 2020-21 till 23-24. During COVID time, Asian exports accounted for almost half of our total exports, 47%. Now it has fallen to 38%.
I see.
And in fact, the share of US and Europe has increased over this period from 2019-20 to 23-24. So this is a churn that we are seeing, and which we don't realize if we don't look at destination-wise data. So the major loss that we are experiencing is not on account of slowdown in advanced economies, but it is due to our lower exports to Asian markets, which at one point in time used to be almost accounting for half of our total export basket.
And so have you been able to look into why this is?
Yes. So we looked at why this is. So as I said, Bangladesh is one of the country with whom our exports have declined. And that one reason for this is, again, oil export is one reason, but then there are other reasons also, like agricultural products, coarse cereals. There has been a decline in exports of coarse cereals to Bangladesh. Export of cotton has declined from India to Bangladesh.
Right.
So all these factors have resulted in lowering the share of Asia in the overall export basket.
Right. And this decline in exports, is it in value terms or also in volume terms, that
No,
the
this-
actual amount that we are sending is
No,
less?
so we get data in value terms. So
Right.
this is in USD billion term, and then we have the full value, and we compute the shares of all the
Right.
region, and there we see that the share has declined from 47 to 38% for Asia, and for both for America as well as Europe, there has been a 4% increase each during this period from
Right.
during this 5-year period.
So this is actually a little worrying as far as policymakers
Yes,
are concerned,
absolutely.
because all estimates show that these developed economies, which are increasing their share of Indian exports,
Yeah.
those are still going to be slowly growing over the next few years. There's
Yeah.
not going to be any big
Yes.
recovery.
Yes.
And the recovery actually has been happening in Asian markets, which are taking less and less of Indian goods.
Yes. So
That's not good news.
yeah. So if we look at World Economic Outlook, their latest
Right.
projection, they said that the slowdown in global growth, whatever we are seeing, is being driven by advanced economies. So even if we are increasing our share of exports to EU, that does not help much, because growth is coming from Asian economies. It's going to come
Right.
from ASEAN. It's going to come from emerging economies. So we need to understand why there has been a decline, and look at sector specific,
Of course.
what is happening with textile, why textile exports, why cotton exports to Bangladesh has fallen. So each sector will have its own story. There will be some sectors which will recover in the coming months, because it is expected that from September onward, exports will recover because oil prices will rise. But then there are other sector-specific challenges that need to be addressed. And maybe because these ASEAN countries, they have set up their free trade region,
Yes.
and India is not part of it. So that may also be a reason.
This is the
that-
RCEP.
the RCEP, that they are exporting and importing amongst themselves, because there they can do without duty, and then India's exports are non-competitive for them. So a lot of these things are at play currently, but this was a really insightful data point that we see that the share of Asia in the overall export basket has declined.
I see. And so now, right before the G20 summit in Delhi, PM Modi had gone for an ASEAN summit,
Right.
and where it was expected that they were going to discuss the free trade agreement that India has with the ASEAN countries. So now it becomes all the more important that they review it.
Yes. So we need to review our FTAs. We need to fast track FTAs wherever possible. With Bangladesh also, there was discussion on setting up of some export agreement that needs to be fast tracked,
Right.
because there is a visible churn happening in exports, not only of India's but also of ASEAN markets, that they are shifting their trade partners, and maybe India might be losing. So that issue needs to be addressed.
Absolutely.
While some part will be addressed with the commodity prices rising, as I said, engineering goods exports will improve now because commodity prices are
Yes.
rising. But then there are other commodities, the exports that need to be seen. The duties that we have imposed over the last couple of months, that may also be playing a role in slump in exports. So all these issues need to be seen.
So now I'll get to a few others of the audience questions. Sridhar asks, would it be right to say that if not for our oil and gas imports, which India does a lot of, it would be a lot easier for us to become an export-oriented country where we won't have a trade deficit, but we start having a surplus?
Yeah, that is true to a large extent, because we are importing oil and we depend on oil prices. We are vulnerable to the fluctuations in oil prices. And in fact, there's a lot of analysis on how much every $10 increase in oil leads to adverse impact on our current account deficit.
Right.
Because now every $10 increase in crude oil leads to 0.3 to 0.4% deterioration in our current account deficit. So oil is definitely one reason that needs to be seen. But at the same time, when we are importing oil, we are processing also, and we are exporters of petroleum products also. So that is also one thing, that when we benefit, we then tend to lose also during falling in prices, and then we stand to gain during increase in prices. But the other part is also the various commodity prices, because a major chunk of our trade also lies in engineering goods. And engineering goods includes a lot of commodities like iron, steel, aluminium, non-ferrous, zinc, all these items. And there also, if the prices fluctuate, it will have a concomitant impact on our exports and imports. And for some countries, we have seen that we used to be net exporters of engineering goods. Now we have become net importers. So because of the unfavorable developments in prices. So oil definitely is a part, but then there are other segments also.
Right. And now this is the final question, which I think is a good summing up question, which is, according to your assessment, how achievable is the $2 trillion export target?
So this is to be achieved by 2030. And currently we have seen, if we look at the current exports of goods and services, it's around $765 billion. So there is it is an ambitious target.
Of course.
And a lot will depend on, firstly, how much we rely on services, how much cushion is being provided by services exports, because goods exports, a lot depends on subdued demand, depends on commodity prices, but then we have to make efforts to diversify our services exports, boost services exports. So if we are able to do that, then we will be able to move closer to this target. And second point, as we discussed, we need to diversify, we need to think through destinations.
Yes.
Because we cannot just concentrate on a handful of advanced economies. We need to diversify our exports to Asian markets, which hold the potential going forward. We need to see what are the sector specific issues. Is the inverted duty structure something which is harming? Are the tariffs are something which are causing a concern? So each sector needs to be addressed. Logistic is a problem. We have set up a committee to improve logistics. So logistics, infrastructure, ease of doing business, labor regulation. So there are a lot of things to be done. It is an ambitious target, but it can be achieved. It's not something which is out of sight.
Not impossible, but improbable.
Yes.
So on that note, I mean, that's what we have on the export data. Basically, our exports have been declining, largely due to a fall in commodity prices, oil prices. But one serious aspect that is emerging from the data is that as a destination, Asia is now becoming a smaller and smaller share of India's exports. This is bad news for India, because where the areas that are becoming a larger share, which is the US and Europe, those economies are not likely to see any strong recovery in the next few years. The stronger growth is going to come from Asia. And if those countries are not going to depend so much on India's exports, then that's not great news for India's exports overall, which is a significant pillar of our economic growth. So we need to reprioritize where we're sending our exports, along with, of course, a lot of reforms sector-wise that we need to look at, seeing why particular sectors are doing worse than before. But that's what we have for you. Thank you so much for watching.